Hello, and welcome to my story of being a Toronto Blue Jays fan. This video will be a bit of a love letter to the 2025 Toronto Blue Jays, a little bit of a comparison to the 1993 team, just for S and gigs, and my own personal story with the Blue Jays and the sport of baseball. First and foremost, Toronto Blue Jays, thank you. This has been a very, very special season, and I'm excited to dive into the multitude of reasons why. Also, I thought doing this video in silence might be kind of weird, so I thought I'd include some calming background music, and thought it might be nice, so I gave it a shot. Okay, I'd like to start with a little personal history. I've been a big fan of the Blue Jays since 1988. I was 6 years old. My father and I had a lot of things in common. Camping, Cub Scouts, science, math, video games. Yes, I'm a nerd. But baseball, specifically Blue Jays baseball, was what we bonded over the most. I still get tears in my eyes whenever I hear the opening theme to Labatt's Blue Jays baseball on TSN from the early 90s, and when I hear Jim Hewson and Buck Martinez call a baseball game. I owned the O Canada VHS tape, the story of the 1992 Toronto Blue Jays, and the 1993 World Series videos as a kid. I watched them so many times. I'm genuinely surprised they actually survived. I don't have them anymore. I don't have a VCR either, but I'm delighted that they're on YouTube now, and I admit I've watched them many, many more times over the years. I can easily recite every single word of narration from each video, and yet sometimes I forget how old my girlfriend is. Go figure. I don't claim to know everything about those two teams, but I lived, ate, and breathed baseball from ages 5 to 16, right up until my dad passed away in 1998. I was a social kid, but I loved also playing on my own. My mom can confirm that I would spend hours and hours by myself in our backyard playing baseball, reenacting my favorite moments, practicing my pitching, and would play full games on my own using ghost players and runners, etc. When I toss up the ball before I'd hit it, I'd actually emulate various pitches too. I'd toss up a knuckleball, try to get no spin on it. I'd spin it as much as I could to mimic a curveball, and I'd even toss it up to a lower height to give me less time imitating a fastball. My parents had a very functional backyard. My father had a workshop, a full elevated sun deck on top, and a large vegetable garden. My middle brother and I would regularly play baseball in the backyard too. That combined with my solo playing, we had literally worn 4 patches of dirt into the lawn, representing the 4 bases, and even slightly worn in baselines too. It very much resembled the sand lot, much more than a backyard for many years. Like I said, our backyard was functional, not pretty. The garden they had was raised off the main lawn by a short concrete wall about 18 to 24 inches off the ground. I can't remember exactly. The garden was effectively my outfield. If I hit a ground ball against that wall, that was basically a ground out. The sun deck was up and to my left, and treated that like the green monster of Fenway Park in Boston. Hitting the ball off the front of the deck walls would usually count for a double, or at least a long single. But managing to hit it onto the sun deck was a short porch home run. Into the garden, the outfield would change from season to season, depending on what vegetables my parents would plant. My 2 most memorable ones were the snow peas, or peas in the pod, we called them, and that was my favorite. My father would have panels of mesh fencing placed upright for the plants to grow vertically, and I recall he'd actually normally have a shorter one in front of a taller one. The difference in height in my imagination represented the bullpen over a fence in most ballparks. Having one of my home runs, hitting the tall wall and bouncing back down into the bullpen was one of the most satisfying things for me, as that's how many home runs at the Sky Dome looked like, one hit to left field. Hitting off that high back wall, no, I said that part already, sorry. The other crop was the raspberry bushes planted against the very back fence that was opposite to the end of the yard from home plate. That was basically dead center field for me. If I had to get my hands in those prickly bushes to retrieve my ball, I knew I'd hit it real good. As I said earlier, I'd spend hours and hours out there on my own, practicing my craft, living my own little world, and loving every second of it. I would study and imitate all the Blue Jays' batting stances. I learned years later that my parents would regularly stand in their bedroom and watch me through their window, hiding behind curtains just to not disturb me, practicing the stances, doing my own running commentary, and they would just smile. It warms my heart that someone else also got to share in my joy. The bat that I used was a small wooden souvenir bat we bought in Seattle at the Kingdome on a trip we made to see the Jays play. It was a perfect bat for me. Perfect in the sense that it combined with a wiffle ball. It would be a bit tougher to hit the ball out of our backyard, negating the regular need to climb the fences to retrieve it from our neighbors' yards, and also added a little realism to my baseball. Using a full-size plastic bat and a wiffle ball would have made hitting home runs too easy. For my 7 to 11-year-old mind, I had a perfect setup, and I could not get enough of it. And it was real. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, the Blue Jays lost. They lost in Game 7 of the World Series in extra innings. It was possibly also the most heartbreaking way possible. This is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. I actually get sad and a sinking pit in my stomach whenever I think about the last half hour of that game. However, I think many will agree that it might have just been the best World Series ever. And I believe that the best team didn't win. The team that won 4 games won that series. And I believe any honest baseball fans feel that same way. I've not consumed any media at all on this topic since the final out was recorded. I didn't watch any post-game coverage, interviews, or analysis. It's been very painful. It feels like the ultimate underdog story made into an 8-month-long movie, only to have the wrong ending. I'm not saying the Dodgers did not deserve to win. They weren't there by accident, and they got it done. I only ask anyone watching this that maybe isn't a Blue Jays fan to consider many of the factors at play here. Anyone who just might happen to be a very long-time Dodgers fan that stumbled across this video, let me try this approach. I'm not up on my Dodgers history, but according to Wikipedia, between 1989 and 2007, they made the playoffs 4 times, and were not really taken very seriously in baseball through that period. And those 4 playoff appearances, they only won a total of 1 playoff game. Try to imagine, in that scenario, the Dodgers of 2001 winning their division, beating their arch rivals in the first round, coming back from the brink of defeat in the NLCS, with storybook moments all year long, taking it all the way to extra innings in Game 7 of the World Series, only to lose to the Yankees. That would crush your soul. And that's about how 10 to 15 million Canadians are feeling right now. You throw in a little bit of Canada versus USA culture conflict on top of that, it's devastating. However, this morning my girlfriend informed me that an overwhelming majority of comments she's been seeing have been positive, even from the people claiming to be Dodgers fans. Before I turned my YouTube notifications off the morning after Game 7, I received a few negative, snarky comments on some of my older YouTube comments from like the ALCS. I wasn't surprised, but it didn't help. But I'm relieved to hear that people's responses have been positive. I'm very concerned about all the negativity I'm bound to encounter. Their excessive negativity affects my mental health pretty greatly, and I know it shouldn't, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. And yes, here I am posting a detailed opinion on the internet. It's a very distinct possibility I'll have to turn off comments on this video. But I hope I attract all you lovely people and fellow sane sports fans. And I want to tell my story, and the story of this team. I love baseball, and I love hockey. But one thing I often have a large problem with is what I call, and I'm sure other people call, is the average sports fan. And in my eyes, this is defined by many different characteristics. The fan that thinks their team or players can do no wrong, and the rules don't seem to apply to them. The fan that feels the instant their team doesn't succeed, they think that they suck. The pessimistic fan. I knew they'd blow it. The ones that seem to think their players aren't even trying. The ones that say players suck, even though they've probably led the league in multiple categories all year long. Sure, they might have not come through in the clutch moment, But they got us. They got that team to where they are. Take your head out of your butt and consider all the facts at play. The ones that are critical of everything their team does in a loss, and then is right back on board as soon as they start winning again. Newsflash. These are human beings. They don't owe you anything. They always want to win. They always try their hardest, whatever that might be each game, whatever that might look like. They're not robots that are just programmed to win. They give us everything in their souls and leave everything out on the field. I can be very critical of players on my favorite teams, but I'm able to keep it constructive and empathetic. I think about how I would feel if it were me out there. If you're someone that lacks empathy and logic, well, I don't think we're going to be friends. Everyone is entitled to their opinion on anything. Granted. So here's mine. If you're someone that is of the opinion that this year's Blue Jays team blew it, sucks, they failed, or couldn't handle the pressure, I don't think you understand what this team has done, what they've accomplished, and what they stand for. I don't think you actually follow this team. I don't acknowledge your fandom, and I think the world might be a better place if you just kept your opinions to yourself. Okay, let's get back to neutral here. Let's do a few facts about this season and this team. And I know stats aren't everything. I'm a true believer there are so many immeasurable factors that make a team great. But let's have a little fun here. This was the first Blue Jays team to win the American League East in 10 years, and only the second time they've done it in 32 years. Winning the ALDS was their first postseason series victory since 2016. Last year, the Blue Jays finished dead last in the American League East, 11 games back of a wildcard spot and 20 games behind the Yankees. This year, they took first place in the AL East on July 3rd and never relinquished it, meaning they dominated the AL East for just shy of 3 months. They were tied with the Yankees right at the end, but they beat the Yankees in the season series, so they had first place locked up for months. On March 26, 2025, before the season began, the Blue Jays were given less than a 50% chance to even make the playoffs. I believe it was around 46%. I didn't write it down. And only a 2.6% chance to win the World Series. Other teams that were more likely to make the postseason were the Atlanta Braves, the New York Mets, Minnesota Twins, Texas Rangers, Baltimore Orioles, and the Arizona Diamondbacks. None of those teams made the playoffs this year. MLB.com predicted the following. The Boston Red Sox would win the AL East. The Atlanta Braves would win the NL East. Texas Rangers win the AL Central. Baltimore, New York Yankees, and the Astros win the wild card spots. The Red Sox go on to win the AL pennant, and the Dodgers win the World Series to be the first team to repeat as champions in 25 years. Well, they got that right, but just barely. Even after the Blue Jays won their division, and having the third best record in the whole league, they were the fourth best odds to win it all, behind Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Seattle. By the end of the season, the Jays held these stats, according to MLB.com, and this is for the entire league. They were first in batting average, up from 19th last season. Many people seem to say that batting average doesn't matter anymore. This fan strongly disagrees. They're first in on-base percentage, up from 13th last year. They're 7th in slugging, 3rd in on-base plus slugging. They were first in overall total hits, and they struck out the second fewest times in the whole league, only behind the Kansas City Royals. When the season began, no one could have predicted this. After they won the AL East, they were basically playing with house money. Beating the Yankees was so special. The performance in Game 7 against Seattle is now a thing of legend. If you're mad at this team because they lost the World Series when they likely shouldn't have even made the playoffs, I just kind of feel sorry for you. You're missing out on feeling something very special. This team has fully reignited my love for this great game, and I've never, ever been more excited for a spring training to start. The Blue Jays teams from the 80s and 90s obviously were also very special and were ultimately more successful. The Jays won the AL East 5 times between 1985 and 1993. Through that period, they were in the top 5 of the odds list to win the World Series, but never in their history have they ever been the number 1 pick to win it all before the season started. They've been a top pick to win their division a few times. They've essentially been underdogs for their entire 48-year history. Looking back on the 93 team, it's pretty easy to say that's the most loaded and overall best team this franchise has ever known. But I think it warrants a little comparison. So, let's start this argument with a few things worth pointing out here. I was only 10 and 11 years old when the Jays won their back-to-back World Series. I really wasn't old enough to appreciate all the intricacies of the game at that age. I appreciated what the Jays were doing, and I understood the big stats, which back then were just things like batting average, home runs, RBIs, ERA, wins and losses, and saves. But let's face it, I was 10. That being said, in the last 32 years, I've consumed a lot of content about those two teams. And comparing this era of baseball versus the early 90s, that's no easy task. I considered including a graphic of comparing the advanced stats of both teams, but it seemed like a moot point. The game has changed a lot. But I thought I'd do a brief position-to-position comparison based on personal observation and some basic stats I came up with. So let me have a quick little drink here. All right. So let's break this down. And let's just see objectively. Well, I did say from my observation and perspective, but let's try and objectively see what's the best Blue Jays team in history. I think it's between the 93 team and this one. Just my opinion. So, start in left field. Left field in 93, we had Darnell Coles and Ricky Henderson versus this year of Nathan Lucas, Miles Straw, and Davis Schneider. Ricky Henderson is likely the greatest leadoff hitter of all time, and obviously the greatest base stealer of all time. He came from the Oakland Athletics, which is a huge Blues Jays rival from those days, so I don't think a lot of Blue Jays fans really liked him or trusted him, but we got him anyway. But he was only a Blue Jay for about 4 months, and he really didn't live up to the expectations a whole lot. At that point in his career, his defense was kind of shoddy, only had a .215 average, and only really had one clutch hit in the World Series that I remember. I feel the 2025 team relied on their defense more than just about anything else. I believe they had one of, if not the best defensive lineup in all of baseball. Lucas, Schneider, and Straw all came up with huge and timely hits all year, all through the playoffs, and their defense was second to none. My verdict, left field goes to 2025. Center field, Devon White versus Dalton Varsho. I love Dalton Varsho. I think he's an absolute rock when it comes to defense in center field, and his bat is no slouch. Varsho made amazing contributions to this team when he was healthy. But in the World Series, he slumped pretty badly. Devon White also had some power, tons of speed, stolen bases, hit for average. I don't remember him ever making an error. Not saying Varsho made a lot of errors. He didn't. I can't think of one of those either. But overall, comparing Varsho's 2025 to Devon White's 93, I think the past is stronger here. Devo wins. 93 gets this one. Right field, Joe Carter versus Addison Barger, Nathan Lucas, and George Springer. I could break this down, but it's Joe Carter. I think Addison Barger has an incredibly bright future on this team and had an amazing year and put on an MVP caliber performance in the postseason. Plus, my mom has a little crush on him, and in our daily discussions about this team throughout the season, I've made fun of the fact that he might just be my future stepdad, and now I refer to him as Daddison Barger. But Joe is the greatest Blue Jay of all time, and it's not just because of his walk-off home run in 93. He had the most RBIs in all of baseball over a 4-year period, got 30-plus home runs and 100-plus RBIs virtually every season. He was well above average defensively and just an all-around amazing player. And he was the face of the franchise for an entire generation. Verdict, despite my mom thinking Barger's a cutie pie, it's Joe, and there's no contest. 93. First base, John Olerud versus Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Oy. A guy who flirted with a 400 batting average most of the season versus the face of the 2025 Blue Jays. Time for a small confession. The way Vladdy was playing when he signed his $500 million deal, I was extremely unhappy, and I felt he hadn't earned that kind of money yet. I felt he was underperforming in just about every way, and it seemed like he grounded into a double play every game, once every game. But after this year, I'm convinced he's earned every penny. I'm on board, and I genuinely hope he just gets better. But in comparing these two, Olerud and Guerrero had the same number of home runs. But Olerud absolutely destroyed Vladdy's offensive numbers, and it's not even close. One jarring comparison is this. Vladdy had 34 doubles this year. 34, which is incredible. Olerud had 54 doubles in 1993, and that's just one stat that he just crushed Vladdy in. If Olerud's defensive capabilities were shaky, that might have made this decision pretty much impossible. But he was pretty reliable. After reviewing the stats, I have to give it to Olerud on this one. I know that for a Blue Jay career, Vladdy will beat out Olerud. But comparing 1993 to 2025, it's got to be John. Verdict, 93. Second base, Roberto Alomar versus Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Ernie Clement, and Andres Gimenez. Roberto Alomar in his prime was simply one of the best players in Major League Baseball, and he's in his prime here. Ernie Clement is one of my favorite players right now, and is amazing at everything he does. But he didn't play second base too much this year, and I mean, it's Alomar. It's Robbie. IKF and Gimenez have gold gloves. They're great. But it's Alomar of the 90s. Verdict, it's got to be 93. Shortstop. Bo Bichette and Andres Gimenez versus Dick Schofield and Tony Fernandez. Bo versus Fernandez. I might get crucified for this one. Also, I only know Dick Schofield was a factor because of looking into the stats for this video. He started that year at shortstop, but broke his arm early in the season, and Jays eventually traded for Tony Fernandez to return to Toronto from the New York Mets on June 11th, and man, they never looked back. For my money, Tony Fernandez is the best shortstop the Blue Jays ever had. Bo has Tony beaten in power, and Gimenez is incredible defensively, and combined did us wonders throughout this season. But I think Tony will always have Bo beat defensively. I shouldn't say always, but this year he does. And beats out Gimenez offensively. And for me, and just me, shortstop is a position where defense is infinitely more important than offensive production. And Fernandez was no slouch at the bat. He finished 93 with a 306 average. One of this year's team's strengths was the offense produced by the bottom of the lineup. Fernandez was good at that too. Bo may one day turn into the best shortstop the Jays have ever had. He might have to pass Troy Tulowitzki to get that honor. And he's had some incredible offensive years for Toronto. However, as we have so far been strictly comparing the two seasons, I think Tony gets this one. But please, rest assured, if you're watching and if you disagree, I'd very much be willing to have and enjoy a friendly debate on this one. My verdict is 93 gets this. Third base, Ed Sprague versus Ernie Clement. Ed Sprague had a couple of great moments for that team, and he had a huge moment in the 92 World Series. But at this exact moment, I'm willing to compare Ernie Clement's in his prime and the things that he's contributing to this team to Roberto Alomar in his prime. Verdict, it's Clement in 2025. It's not even close. Catcher, Pat Borders versus Alejandro Kirk. Pat Borders was the MVP in the 1992 World Series. He got hits in all 12 games the Jays played that postseason, and he was absolutely stellar defensively behind the plate. But season to season, his offensive stats weren't that impressive. I think aside from Russell Martin and Ernie Witt, Kirk might be the best offensive catcher the Jays have ever had. I acknowledge that a catcher's offensive output probably isn't his primary focus. But Kirk is also one of the best defensive catchers in the game right now. He's up for the Gold Glove. Trying very hard to remember the contributions that Borders gave to this team, the only two things I really think he did a lot better than Kirk was throwing out base stealers and being faster on the base pass. Let's face it, Kirk is like Homer Simpson out there. I'll agree. Recency bias may play a pretty large part here. But I think Kirky gets this one. Verdict, 2025. Designated hitter, Paul Molitor versus George Springer. Oh, man. The 1993 World Series MVP versus my girlfriend's favorite player ever. This is lose-lose. Can we just call it a tie? Anyone who saw what Molitor did in the 93 will understand. If you didn't, you will think I'm out of my dang mind for not picking George Springer here. My verdict? It's a tie. The pitching staff. Okay, I'm not going to go through this pitcher by pitcher, I promise you. I'll just kind of break it down a little bit. In 93, they had Juan Guzman, Dave Stewart, Pat Henkin, who had a career year with 19 wins, and Todd Stottlemyre, who was reliable, but nothing really special. Jack Morris was also there, but he was injured quite a lot and wasn't much of a factor that year. I don't recall their mid-relief bullpen being anything particularly special either. Dwayne Ward, however, was the best closer in baseball that year, and I don't think it was even that close. He had like 47 saves or something like that. It was just ridiculous. This year we had Chris Bassett, Max Scherzer, half of the year, Shane Bieber for part of the year, Kevin Gausman, and Jose Barrios as the starting rotation. Hoffman was our closer, and let's face it, wasn't the most reliable. He gave up the most home runs of any reliever in baseball. But I genuinely, and I mean this wholeheartedly, he was not the reason why they lost this year. Flat out. Hoffman, in my eyes, was shaky going into the playoffs. I looked at him and I did not see someone that could lock things down. His performance in the series against the Yankees and the series against the Mariners pretty much flipped that switch. He still has a bit more work to do to convince me that he's definitely our full ace as far as closers are concerned, but he's several steps up on my ladder of respect. And the bullpen for the Jays this year as a whole very easily went from completely lights out amazing and shut down to totally unreliable overnight. And it went back and forth and back and forth. It was only a matter of finding out which version of that bullpen we got that in each game. And I know Trey Savage was there. He's a phenom, and I'm not forgetting him. But he was only there for, 8 starts? 8 starts in 1 relief appearance? 9 starts. Doesn't matter. I could easily sit here and go back and forth on who has the advantage for pitching. I'm not going to break down the stats. This is kind of mostly going on feeling and observation. And I feel like overall, I think I was more comfortable with the starters in 93. Without picking this apart piece by piece, I have to lean towards the 90s. Verdict, 93. Bonus fact. The 93 lineup was so good, they had Roberto Alomar in his prime hitting 6th. Granted, his legacy has been tarnished by his actions over the years, which I won't go into here, but he still was one of the greatest overall baseball players of his era, and they had him hitting 6th. Going on verdicts of these positions, 1993 team wins 6-3 with a tie at the DH. The final topic I'd like to take into consideration are the intangible factors that make this year's team so special. This team was a family. Many of them are on record stating that this was the most fun they've had playing baseball, and this is the best team and closest team they've ever played on. The back-to-back teams in the 90s were very special. This, and what I'm about to say, may totally be wrong, but it's just a gut feeling. I think it's conceivable to think that there may have been a couple of egos on the 93 team in that room, in the locker room. Nothing to the point of toxicity, nothing that caused major problems. But in 2025, there were no egos in that locker room. Every single person in that dugout played for each other. These guys played like me in the backyard. I felt more love, joy, camaraderie, and connection from this year's team than any other in sports. This is the most invested I've been in a professional sports team since the 2011 Vancouver Canucks. And I know, I'm looking at this year's team through the eyes of a 43-year-old versus an 11-year-old. Apples and oranges. Comparing things using those two drastically different perspectives, that's tough. Before writing this, I'd given the award of Best Jays team of all time to this year, even though they didn't win the World Series. Just because they were the best doesn't mean they were necessarily going to win. This was the single greatest season of baseball I've ever watched as an adult. I'm able to carry more distinct memories going forward and a new special bond formed with my significant other that I will cherish forever. But after taking a dive into history and sitting down and actually comparing them, I have to give it to 1993. Touch 'em all, Joe. 2025 might be my favorite, but you're still the best. Thank you for joining me here today. And as I always like to say, be kind, be strong, and be awesome. And take care of yourselves out there.